Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel and welcome back to another Sims 4 speed building video, or welcome to the channel if you are new here. So in today's video I'm going to be building in the world of Forgottenwww, which is the world that we got from the game pack The Sims 4 Vampires, and I'm going to be building a big vampire family home. So I know I actually spoke about this last week in my video about the week before, but somehow, and honestly I don't even know how, but I managed to catch another cold again. So if you can notice a difference in my voice, that's what it is. I tried to like dose myself up before starting this voiceover with taking throat spray and soothers, just trying to make my voice sound the best it possibly can right now, but apologies in advance if you can hear a slight difference in my voice. That's what it is, and unfortunately I can't really do too much about it, but I really want you to share this build with you guys because this build is probably one of my favourite builds that I've ever done, and that's saying something because I've done my fair share of builds in The Sims 4. I just love this build so much and I've just been so excited to share it all with you guys. So this house has 5 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms and it can sleep 7 Sims in total. Well, I mean, I say that, but there's actually beds for more Sims than 7 Sims, but the way I designed the rooms is to be for 7 Sims, but I'll talk about that in just a second. But the way that I actually designed the bedrooms is to be for a set of parents, then there is 2 teenagers rooms, a room for a toddler, and then there is also a kids room as well, which has 2 bunk beds in, which I was thinking would be for 2 children. Now there is also a basement in this house, but I say a basement, there's actually 2 basements in this house. So the way I designed it was you actually walk through the basement door, which is in like the main hallway of the house, you go downstairs and there's like the first initial basement. Now when I was building it I was thinking that maybe if your Sims invite their mates around or something and they know that they've got a basement, that's the only basement that they see. You know, down there's a power generator, there's like some survival kit stuff, maybe if there's like a power cut or something, you know, this house is sorted. But there is actually some double doors in that basement which lead then down to a second basement, which is where the really interesting stuff starts to happen. So when you go down into the second level of the basement, you're first greeted with a prison section. So it's basically like a jail section in the downstairs portion of this house. There are 2 jail cells, and basically if you wanted to, you can actually capture some Sims, like some townies roaming around all the different worlds, and capture them and keep them as prisoners in the basement, which is actually quite fun for gameplay, and I know a lot of people actually do quite a similar thing. But for vampires, I feel like it's so necessary, you know. With vampires, they can't just walk to the fridge and make themselves, I don't know, like a spaghetti carbonara or whatever. They actually have to go out and either eat from plasma fruits or the fruit bag things that your Sims can order, or if they wanted to, they could actually just, you know, eat from actual Sims. That sounds really gross and really weird, but you know what I mean. Your Sims actually will eat other Sims if they're vampires, and to have a prison section in a house for vampires, I just felt like it was kind of necessary. So there is 2 prison cells downstairs in the basement, and then you actually go through some more double doors, and then you're actually greeted with this massive area which is basically like a vampire like master suite kind of thing going on. So down there we've got some statues of all like different vampire things. We've also got some vampire urns, which I imagine were like past generations of this family. Then there is also the pipe organ, and there is also 6 coffins as well in the basement. So if you wanted to, you could have a really big family living in this house, just have some of them sleep in the basement and have some of them sleep in the bedrooms. You can honestly do whatever you want, but I just love the fact that this house has got a prison section in it because, like I said, I feel like it's kind of necessary if you have vampires, and that's the kind of thing that I like to do if I ever do play with vampires in my gameplay, although it does sound quite morbid. But it's easy for gameplay, and it's also a really good storyline to go with as well. Now, you might notice that I said that this house sleeps 7 Sims, but there's actually only 6 coffins downstairs in the basement, which is something that I want to touch on in a minute when I actually talk about the storyline for this household that are going to be living in this house for my save file, because this house is going to be for my save. But I want to talk about what I'm actually doing right now. So as you can see, the main structure of the house came together quite quickly, and I do want to mention that I was actually looking at a picture that I found on Pinterest when I was building this. I saw this picture and I instantly fell in love with it, and there was no doubt that I wasn't going to recreate it in the game. So I'll find the picture and I'll pop it up on the screen now so you can have a little look. The original picture had quite a lot of red brick on the exterior for the wallpaper, which I liked, but I didn't want to do the exact same thing in the picture as in the game. So I decided to actually mix in some of the wallpapers, and I tried to make it so there's several different wallpapers going on. So I actually initially placed down 3 base game wallpapers, which was the white paneling, the grey brick, and then the same brick as the grey brick, but in like a darker shade. But then I actually switched it out to be a darker one, which is from Cottage Living. You would have seen me just do it a minute ago. But currently I'm just going around the exterior of the build. I'm actually creating a fence using loads of different live edit menu pieces that we actually have in the game. Now we do actually have a fence that came with the Vampires game pack, but I decided not to use it just of the fact that I actually found this archway in the live edit menu. You can see I placed it at the very front of the house. It comes from Cats and Dogs, and I just needed to use it in this build because it actually comes from a graveyard in the game. Now you might be familiar with the world of Brinton Bay, and you might be familiar with where the island is, where the museum is. In that neighbourhood at the very back is actually a graveyard for Cats and Dogs, and it uses the archway that I've used at the front of the build. And I just saw the perfect opportunity to use it in this build because, you know, it comes from a graveyard, it's a bit old, a bit mouldy looking, and I just thought it would fit in with this house so perfectly. I also wanted the house to be a bit scary from the outside. I didn't want it to feel like a really nice happy suburban family home from the outside. I wanted it to feel quite spooky, and so I decided to use loads of different pieces from a live edit menu to create this fence. So the actual iron fencing that I've actually merged into the wall, that is from base game, as well as them kind of like stone pillars that I've placed in some of the different sections in the fence, that is also from base game. But then all the rest of it is from Cats and Dogs. So, you know, like the bottom part of the brick fence, then the archway at the front, and then also some square posts that I've used at the very front of the build and like on the corners, they're also from Cats and Dogs. Basically the whole fence is from a live edit menu, and I just thought it would be really interesting to use it instead of actually using one that's in the game. I also put an actual fence, like one of the fences that we actually have in the build and buy menu, in between the actual fence that I've created, just because sometimes when you use the live edit menu items, sometimes Sims and like the game won't recognise them to be actual items, and they'll just kind of like walk through them, and realistically you're not going to be able to walk through an iron fence. And so I made sure to actually place down a fence underneath like the brick wall. I merged it in, you can't see it, but don't worry, there is a fence there, so your Sims won't be walking through any iron fencing. I know they're vampires, but they're not that skilled, so I did just want to mention that. Also, I decided to actually do like a little pond area in the back garden as well, which I felt fitted in so perfectly with the world of Forgotten Hollow, because not on this side of the world, but on the opposite side where the vampire brother and sister live, can't remember their names, but there is actually a massive kind of like lake at the bottom, and I wanted to actually bring some of the stuff that's in the world into this build as well. And so I actually decided to create like a little pond at the back of the house, and then with actually creating the live edit fence, I was able to actually make it look like the fence had like been broken down, and maybe over time the pond has kind of expanded and maybe swallowed some of the fencing pieces, and it's just kind of deteriorated, and I really liked it. But anyway, moving on from that and actually talking about what I'm doing right now. So as you can see, I'm just going around and I'm doing some landscaping. Now I do want to mention that I did actually have to cut out the landscaping for the majority of the back garden, just because I had so much footage for this house. So in total it took me 7.5 hours to build this house, and then when I actually came in and I sped the footage up and, you know, I edited it through the first time, it was a 35-minute video without any screenshots. So with screenshots, it was going to be a bit of a long video, and so I decided to cut out the majority of the back garden landscaping, but it's pretty much the exact same as the front garden anyway. I just didn't want the video to be really long, and I also decided to cut out all of the hallways in the house, which I was really gutted about because I'm normally never like one to love hallways, but I really loved the hallways in this house. But again, I didn't want to make the video really long, but there will be some pictures of them in the screenshots if you are curious of what the hallways look like. But moving on from that and actually talking about the family that's going to be living in this house for my save file. So like I mentioned, there are 7 Sims in total in this family, but there's actually only 6 coffins downstairs in the basement. Now that is because there's only 6 vampire Sims in this household, and there's 1 Sim that is not a vampire and is completely oblivious to the fact that their whole family are vampires. Now the reasoning for this, and I'll get into it because you might be like, how does that make sense, you know, bloodline and whatnot, but basically what I was imagining is once upon a time there was a set of parents. I was personally imagining a husband and a wife. It goes without saying you can have whatever types of Sims that you imagine. This is just what I was personally thinking when I was building this house, but I was imagining that the husband actually came from a really strong bloodline of vampires. You know, their family have been bopping around for years, they've got a really good representation towards their name, you know, they're just a really well valued family in the vampire business. Now I imagine that the wife wasn't actually originally a vampire, and, you know, met her husband, fell in love, got turned into a vampire, and then, you know, years later they got married and had some children and whatnot, all happy families. But originally, she wasn't going to be a vampire. Originally, when she was born, she was actually just a normal sim. Now, I imagine that something happened to one of her siblings. I was personally thinking something a little bit tragic, maybe like a death in the family or something happened. But she actually had to take care of her niece or nephew or whatever and, you know, take authority and become their legal guardian. Now, this is the wife's side of the family. The wife's side of the family are not vampires, and they're also completely unaware that this whole entire side of the family are vampires, because I imagine, you know, the wife got turned into one and then just decided not to bring it up at Winterfest, you know, that, you know, now I actually don't eat normal food for a living, I actually eat something else. I just don't feel like she would have said anything to her family. And so, you know, something happened to one of her siblings, and then tragically she then, you know, got authority of her niece or nephew, and they've now moved into this house, and now there is this kid who I imagine to be a child now living in this house full of vampires, which could be a really good, interesting storyline for gameplay, because at the end of the day, to vampires, they probably look like a bag of Doritos or something, because, you know, that's what kind of what they feed off. And so I really like this storyline, and it actually makes me really excited to actually do some vampire gameplay, because I haven't done it in a little while, but it kind of inspired me to actually sit down and actually play with vampires, because they've actually got some really good fun gameplay. It's one of my favourite occults that we actually have in The Sims 4 so far. In terms of the parents' careers, I was actually personally thinking that the husband was going to be a stay-at-home parent and wasn't actually going to have a job to go to every single day. I was thinking, as this family, you know, the husband's side of the family anyway, has been around for generations, they've probably accumulated quite a lot of money, and, you know, I feel like the husband has probably never had to work a day in their life, and so they just kind of have all this money laying around. They was able to buy this big grand house. I imagine them to be just quite wealthy Sims, but I do actually imagine the wife to have a career, not because they need the money, just for the fact that they've kind of got this special gift and it's something that they really enjoy doing. Now, I actually imagine the wife to be a paranormal investigator, and I've actually had a room in the house like built around this whole entire career, and there's like I think it's how you pronounce it, seance table in there, so your Sims can come and, you know, like get readings and contact the dead and summon Bonehilda if you want to. I just thought that was a really good storyline for the wife. Maybe that's how the husband and the wife met. Maybe something happened to the husband's side of the family. You know, I can't even remember how vampires actually die in like fiction. It's been a while since I watched Vampire Diaries, but, you know, something happened to the vampire side of the family, and maybe they had to go and see the wife to communicate with someone, and they fell in love. Maybe that's how they met. I don't know, but I just imagine that the wife just really likes doing like paranormal investigating and just contacting the dead as kind of like a hobby, more so than actually to make a living, because I imagine them to have quite a lot of money. Now, in terms of the rest of the family in this household, like I mentioned, there is going to be another 2 teenagers, 2 children, and then 1 toddler. I don't really have a storyline in depth for the children and the toddler, because quite hard to give storylines for. I just imagine one of the kids to not be directly blood related, or in a sense directly blood related to the family. You know, it's kind of like their aunt and uncle more so than their parents, and so I don't really have an in-depth storyline for them, apart from they had quite a tragic start to their life, because unfortunately their parents passed away and they had to move in with their extended family. But I do actually have a little bit of an in-depth storyline for the 2 teenagers. Now, I imagine the teenagers to be twins, but they're completely opposites of each other. I was kind of thinking of good vampire, bad vampire kind of scenario. So I was imagining the good vampire to be really into reading, and I don't know why, but for some reason I put 2 different bookcases in their bedroom. I imagine them to be a really sweet sim. Maybe one day they want to age up and actually not become a vampire anymore. Maybe their lifelong dream is actually to get a vampire cure so they can actually become, you know, like a normal human sim. But then I imagine that they're twin, completely opposite, and they actually want to age up one day to become a Grand Master Vampire, which I believe is the highest rank of vampire that we actually have in The Sims 4. I imagine they're not probably the nicest Sims to be around. They're probably the kind of Sim that will do whatever it takes to get to where they want to be. Maybe they're a little bit mean, maybe they're a little bit evil, but that was just kind of what I was thinking for the storyline for this family. But anyway, moving on from that and actually talking about what I'm doing right now. So as you can see, I've now moved on into the inside of this house, and I've started off by furnishing the lounge room. So in the lounge room, I decided to do the Paranormal Stuff wallpaper. The majority of the wallpapers in this house are either from the Paranormal Stuff pack base game, vampires, and then I used one Room of Magic wallpaper as well. I think I used it in the dining room and then in the toddler's room, but that's where the majority of the wallpapers are from. In here, I had so much fun decorating this whole entire house, but especially the lounge room. I got to use the Cottage Living sofas. It's kind of like these Chesterfield sofas, which I imagine to be leather. I used them in this kind of like red swatch, and it really matched the painting that's on the wall on top of the fireplace. I also got to use these StrangerVille bookcases, which I love them bookcases, but are quite hard to place in your regular houses because they're actually on a medium wall height, and normally I only ever seem to build on the shortest wall height, but because this house was actually built on a medium wall height, I was able to use them. But in that room as well, there is also a chess table in the corner, and I just had a lot of fun at decorating that room. I had a lot of fun decorating this whole entire house, and I got to use loads of different objects that I don't normally tend to use. And yeah, anyway, moved on from that. As you can see, I've actually now moved on into the dining room. Realistically, are the Sims going to use it? No. But I was thinking, if they have some friends around and maybe their friends aren't aware that they're vampires, their friends are going to be like, why don't you have a kitchen? Why don't you have a dining room? So I decided to build them in this house, even though your Sims are probably not going to use them if they are actually vampires. But then saying that, remember there is actually a child in this household that is completely unaware that everyone else doesn't actually eat normal human food. But in the kitchen, I actually really like the way the kitchen came together. It's probably one of my favourite kitchens that I've actually done in a really long time. In the middle, I created this like kitchen island, and then either side of it, I actually placed down these columns which are from the Vampires game pack. And then in a second, I'm actually going to add a spandrel in between the columns. And then I'm not even sure what it's called, but you see the thing that's floating on the ceiling with all the different like pots and pans and whatnot. It actually looks like that is being supported by the spandrel. And then I actually used some, I think it's Discover University bar stools as like, you know, a seating area for your Sims to actually sit down and eat in this kitchen, even though I don't think that they will actually be sitting down and eating in this kitchen. But you know, it's kind of all for show. You know, there is someone in this household that thinks everyone eats in this house, you know, normal Sim food, but in fact they don't. But also in this kitchen there is a microwave and a coffee machine. I'm pretty sure vampires can drink coffee, I'm pretty sure of it, but I wanted to add a microwave because there is a toddler in this house, and with toddlers and microwave there's actually a lot more things that Sims can actually make for them when they're at the high chair, which by the way, I did forget to put a high chair in the dining room, but when I actually came in and I took the screenshots, I realised, so I did actually add it in, so don't worry, there is actually a high chair in this house. Makes me think about it though, do toddler vampires eat normal Sim food, and then once they age up, do they then not eat normal food anymore? I don't know, I haven't played with toddler vampires in a really long time. But also in this room there is kind of like a window sofa thing. The one that I've actually used is from Cats and Dogs, but now I have actually moved on into the utility room. Now I know they're vampires, but they still got to do their laundry, and so in here I use the same counters that I used in the kitchen, the one from the vampire pack, and then I just use a washing machine and a tumble dryer, which is from the Laundry Day Stuff pack. I feel like laundry rooms or like utility rooms are quite similar to bathrooms in the fact of it's basically the same thing in every single laundry room that I seem to decorate. You know, there's a washing machine, there's a tumble dryer, there's normally probably a sink in the corner, maybe there's a broom, and maybe there's a hoover or a vacuum, whatever you want to call it. But I feel like it's quite hard to decorate laundry rooms to be different from one another, unless you've got like a woodworking table in there or something like that and it's like park garage. But anyway, moving on from that, as you can see, I've now moved on into the next room, which is the Paranormal Investigators room. So I imagine this room would be a room that clients would come to this house and they would, you know, sit in this room and maybe get to contact their family members or their friends or whatnot who have previously passed away. It's safe to say that I use a lot of the stuff from the Paranormal Stuff pack in this room. So the table in the middle, which is a seance table, I really hope that I'm pronouncing that right, but that is from the Paranormal Stuff pack, as well as the chairs, as well as this little kind of like unit that I've placed in the corner, the grey thing, as well as the paintings on the walls and the shelving unit, and then as well as the like side table, coffee table kind of thing. It's mostly all from the Paranormal Stuff pack, but then I did decorate it with things from other packs. As you can see, I just kind of like faded it into once I cluttered things all onto the floor, because I find like if I actually keep in the footage of me scrolling through the debug menu and the live edit menu and just trying to get general clutter and decorations for a room, it can be a really long video. And so I normally try to like do a transition where there's nothing on the floor and then all of a sudden there is just everything on the floor. So I had so much fun going through the debug menu and the live edit menu, searching for things to clutter up this room with. and I use so many objects in this room that I've never even had a chance to use before. A lot of the clutter is from the debug menu, so for example, all these little kind of like balls which are like purple and pink and white and black, they're from the debug menu, they're from Realm of Magic. The dolls that I've actually placed onto this shelving unit are from the Paranormal Stuff pack, and then there's just other little bits and bobs. One of my favourite things in this room, which I've never used before and I was actually really excited to use in this room, was actually the skull on the wall, which is actually from Journey to Batuu, which if you're familiar with my channel or you've been watching me for a while, you know that that pack is not my absolute favourite pack in the whole entire world. I'm not massively fond of the pack or the idea. I actually recently played through the gameplay of the pack, and let me tell you, as someone who has absolutely no idea about Star Wars, I didn't have a clue what was going on. But there is actually some really nice debug menu items and live edit menu items in the build and buy. But as well in this room, I just tried to go around and just make it look as cluttered as possible. You know, I imagine that this family have been around for a really long time, and in that time, you know, they've accumulated a lot of stuff. They're not going to be exactly living a simple life with next to no decorations over probably like the hundreds of years that maybe like the husband's been around. They're going to have a lot of things and a lot of clutter, and I imagine that a lot of them has actually been placed into this room. One thing that I did actually want to mention is you see the shelving unit that I've actually placed next to the little armchair. Now that is actually a shelf that is from, I believe it's base game. We got it in the, I think it was the Day of the Dead update like years and years ago. It's actually a shelving unit which I actually sized up, but I actually had to merge it into the floor. Now the reason for that is because whereas a shelving unit is meant to sit on a wall, and then when you actually put the walls down in gameplay, it will disappear. But I didn't want it to disappear because where I cluttered it up with loads of different items, when you actually put the wall down, all them items would still be there, but the actual shelving unit itself would disappear because the game thinks it's on the wall. So I actually had to merge it down into the basement just a little bit. So when we actually move down into the basement, you'll see it coming through just a tiny little bit, but it doesn't bother me, so hopefully it doesn't bother you. But anyway, moving on from that, as you can see, I've now moved on to the upstairs portion of this house. I just quickly did one of the bathrooms, and now I'm actually moving on and doing the toddler's room. It's quite difficult to decorate both toddler rooms and children rooms to be quite dark and spooky and vampire-y, so it was definitely a bit of a challenge, but I got to use this vampire teddy bear, which I always see and I always want to place down into houses, but I feel like with Sims that aren't vampires, it might be a bit strange unless they're quite gothic. I feel like that teddy bear might be a bit strange to place into like a normal Sims bedroom, but as this family are vampires, I actually got to use it twice. Once in this room and then the other time in the child's room. But in this room, I decided to go for a base game toddler bed, and then the Parenthood chest of drawers, and then the little dollhouse thing in the corner is also from base game. And then to make it look a little bit more interesting, I actually put some shelving units above the chest of drawers and then just clustered them up with loads of different things I feel like you would have in a toddler's room. So, you know, some diapers, some teddy bears, some dolls, and just some childlike items. But now I have actually moved on into the next bedroom, which is actually one of the teenagers' bedrooms. Now I do want to mention, by the way, I have playtested this whole entire house and everything works absolutely fine. The only one problem that I actually ran into when I was playtesting this house was, do you remember at the front of the house when I actually placed down like the archway from Cats and Dogs? I actually merged in the post box into the wall. Now because I merged it in and it wasn't actually leaning up against an actual wall, it didn't work. But I managed to, when I actually came around to playtesting it, just kind of figure it out, and so it is actually now usable. That was the only one problem I ran into, but I thought I'd mention it now because in this bedroom, when I actually came around to furnishing it, as you can see, I've used this bookcase. It's kind of got some like ivy falling off it. I actually placed it down not expecting it to work. I kind of wanted it to look like the desk was actually built into the bookcase. But surprisingly, when I came around to playtesting it, it actually worked, so I was actually really pleasantly surprised about that. In this bedroom, there is actually a total of 2 bookcases, which means both the teenagers actually have 2 bookcases, because you see the little TV unit that I've placed on the wall, that also doubles up as a bookcase. Your Sims can actually pull books from it as well, which, you know, I thought was quite interesting. I didn't intend for this Sim to have 2 bookcases in the room, but you know, it's just the way it worked out. I imagine this room to be the room for the teenager that's the bad vampire, so the one that's quite evil, you know, gets up to quite bad things, maybe rebels a little bit. I also imagine they're really into music and like heavy metal, so I actually placed down the guitar, which is from base game, which is actually an unlockable item. So it's Grimm's guitar, and the way that you actually get that is if you actually just sign up for the Sims 4 newsletter, and then it's just like a free thing that you can have in your game. And then I also placed down the, I think it's an amplifier. We got it from the Moschino pack, and I've never used that item before, and I've always wanted to use it, and it was just like the perfect opportunity to use it in this house. But anyway, moving on from that, that, as you can see, I've now moved on to the next room, which is the Good Vampires room. So in here, I got to use the Seasons bed in this red swatch, and then this sim actually has a corner like window sofa thing. I actually used the one which is for cats and dogs, but it's kind of a little bit more casual to the one that I've used downstairs in the kitchen. This one looks like it's going to be more so in the teenagers room than the one that I've used downstairs, just because it's got all these like comfy looking pillows and it looks a little bit more casual. But in here, I wanted it to be a really cozy bedroom. I can just imagine this sim every single evening, you know, when the sun is setting, it's sitting at their like window sofa seat thing, sitting there in their pajamas with like a cup of tea or something, maybe reading a book, maybe doing some bullet journaling. I imagine this sim to be a sim to do bullet journaling. I don't know why, but I've never really imagined a sim to do bullet journaling like this sim. I don't know why, it's just kind of like the idea that I get from this sim and their personality. I imagine them to be a bookworm and possibly have the good trait as well. You know, their lifelong dream is to one day have the vampire cure so they can actually become a normal sim and maybe like grow old with a family and, you know, grow old with someone that they love. But in this room there is two bookcases, like I mentioned. There is one which is from Discover University, and then this one which I'm actually just cluttering up is from the Get Together expansion pack, and then I'm actually just using some books which are from the Tiny Living Stuff pack to kind of fill in that empty shelf that was at the top of it. And then I'm just going to go around and finish this room off by adding in a little digital sketch pad onto the sofa. But now, as you can see, I've now moved on into the next room, which is the children's room. This room was so difficult to furnish because I wanted it to be partially vampire-y, but then partially not vampire-y, because the sim that is not actually going to be a vampire in this household is going to be living in this room with their, I think it's their cousin. Yeah, I think it is their cousin. And so I didn't want it to be too vampire-y, but I wanted it to be vampire-y enough for the actual sim that is a vampire. Hopefully that makes sense. Either way, in this room I decided to settle on this base game wallpaper. Now the reason why I'm mentioning it is because I spent a solid 20 minutes or something just deciding on the wallpaper in this room. Originally it was actually going to be a base game wallpaper which was completely solid black, but then I felt like it was too dark for the sim that wasn't going to be a vampire. So I felt like the wallpaper that I used was a nice mix between vampire and not vampire. But in this room I cluttered it up with, you know, the normal children items. We have a little science table, we have the doll's house, we have the void grotto machine in the middle, we also have a little like plushie thing, the same one that I use in the toddler's room but just in a different swatch. There is also a bookcase in this room, a toy box, the wardrobe. There is just a load of different kid like items in this room. There isn't a computer because I feel like the parents in this household would say to them, you can't have a computer until you're a bit older, and so, you know, play with your toys. You can get a laptop maybe when you age up into a teenager. That was just kind of what I was thinking. But anyway, now you can see I've actually now moved on into the next bedroom, which is the parents' bedroom. This room was so fun to furnish because I normally don't find parents' bedrooms as fun and interesting to furnish as I would for like children's rooms or teenagers' rooms or whatever, because I feel like parents' bedrooms normally have to be quite, not simple, but quite standard, because the way that I think whenever I do furnish parents' bedrooms is there's two different sims and they probably have completely different personalities. Maybe they've got some styles that are a bit different from one another, and so I'd normally try to go for quite a neutral bedroom quite a lot in parents' rooms. But this room, because they're vampires, I got to use a bunch of stuff from the vampire game pack, and I just had so much fun doing it. So as you can see, the majority of the furniture is actually grey. Now the wardrobe, the mirror, the bed, and then the pictures that I've just put above the chest of drawers are all from the vampire game pack. And then the chest of drawers is actually from Realm of Magic. Even though Vampires and Realm of Magic are two different packs, the swatches are almost perfect, which I was really happy about. As well as, actually, you can see the little dressing table that I've actually placed in front of the windows. That is from Vintage Glamour Stuff. Again, I felt like the swatch of that was quite similar to the rest of the swatches in this room. I just felt like it all went together really nicely, and I just love this room so much. And I normally don't say that about parents' bedrooms, but anyway, moving on from that, as you can see, I've now moved on downstairs into the basement. So originally when I actually came in and I did the floor plan of this house, I actually did the basement so it was all going to be on one level. But then once I actually came to the near end of the build and, you know, I was kind of finishing up, getting ready to do the basement, I decided to change my mind, and that's when I decided to make it so it's kind of got like the initial basement, which most people think would be the only basement, but then you've got some doors which lead then down into the second basement, where all the kind of interesting and vampire-y things start to happen. I mean, if we're being honest here, realistically, if your Sims friends were going to go downstairs into the basement for any reason, they're going to see that there's actually some double doors that lead to somewhere else. But let's just pretend that maybe the family think that there's going to be like a wine cellar down there, and maybe that's what they tell people. Maybe like, oh, it's not interesting, it's just where we keep some storage or whatever. And you know, people don't come down here, but the only people that do actually come down here are actually prisoners to the family. So as you can see, I just actually did the floor plan and kind of like the structure for the 2 prison cells. Now I used actual walls and the outside of it, but then in between the actual prison cells itself, I like kind of at the front of it, I used the get to work fencing and the get to work gate. We actually got the police career with get to work, and with that we actually got a load of different like prison looking like furniture and like beds and toilets and stuff like that. So it works perfectly for this build. I actually only furnished one prison cell and then went around and did loads of different like cracks in the walls and spider webs and whatnot, and then I literally just copied and pasted the room to next door because it was going to be the exact same. I don't feel like their prisoners are going to be living the life of luxury and have their own individual decorations. I don't feel like their prisoners would actually want to be there. They just kind of, you know, they got captured, they got hallucinated or whatever it is to come downstairs into the basement. They lock the door and, you know, they're stuck in there now for however long that you want to keep them stuck in there for. Anyway, as you can see, now I've actually moved on into the next section, which is kind of like the midway section in between the prison cells and then the actual like vampire master suite. So I didn't want the doors to go straight into the vampire master suite because I wanted it to be quite grand. So you'll see him to walk through this door, and it's got a statue of Vlad, which is from the live edit menu. It's actually in the world of Forgottenwww, and there is also a pipe organ as well. And then you go through one more set of doors, and then you're finally into the main vampire thing, kind of like the main show of the basement for the vampires, because I didn't want it to be like just really easily like accessible for the family. I wanted this basement and the vampire layer, if you want to call it that, quite deep into the basement, and I feel like I did that quite well because you definitely have to walk some steps to get down here. But as you can see, initially I actually placed down 2 coffins, one of like the kind of like basic one, then I sized one down and actually moved objects up. Them ones I don't believe are usable. I didn't playtest them just purely for the fact of I placed them down for decoration, but then I tried to section it so there is the different kind of coffins in their own sections. So I did a section which has 2 coffins in, which I imagine would be for one of the children and then the toddler when they age up. There is also a different section which has another 2 in, which I imagine would be for both of the teenagers, and then there is another section at the end which has some grander kind of coffins, a little bit more expensive looking ones, which I imagine are going to be for the parents. And I actually put them on a platform because I wanted to show kind of like the level of authority. But then as you can see, I'm just going to go around this build now and finish it up, add some vampire urns, and that is basically it. So anyway guys, I am actually going to end this voiceover here. So as always, you can download this build via the gallery. My origin ID is JessicapieYT, or you could just search for the hashtag JessicapieYT or just the hashtag Jessicapie. As always, thank you guys so much for watching this video, and as always, if you do like my content, then please do subscribe, and hopefully I will see you in my next Sims 4 speedbuilding video. Bye guys.